Look, thank you very much to all those presenters in that session. Truly fascinating to see how those companies are tracking at the moment. Look, we've got something a little bit different for you at the moment, right now. It's a debate that we thought would liven up this time of the afternoon and also engage you, the audience, in participating in, I guess, the adjudicating of the outcome of our debate. And we're very fortunate in having the University of WA Debating Group come along and participate and provide you not only with this bit of entertainment, but we're going to ask you at the end of the debate to actually, through a show of hands, give us an indication of how you think each group for the affirmative and the negative actually performed. So I don't want all your biases about the industry to come into play here. We want good, true, objective assessment of their performance as a team and as individuals. So we're not going to mark each deliverer out of 10. But we're certainly going to mark the teams. And should there be a tie of the show of hands, we've fortunately got Michelle Andrews from the DMP and Will Robinson both down the front here, who are going to be our final unbiased, totally unbiased adjudicators of the result. And if we can't get a decision through them, then we'll have a tie. So look, without any further ado, because I know time's getting on, I will quickly introduce each individual debater as they're required to come up to the podium and do their presentation. Each speaker is going to present for 5 minutes, and Anne-Marie's going to keep the time. So you'll hear from Anne-Marie. She's got a pretty strong voice should you go beyond time. And of course, these guys know that they get penalised for not keeping to time, so it works against them. And on that basis, we'll get things underway. And we're very fortunate. I mean, these guys have got a tremendous amount of experience, not only at the national intervarsity debating level, but also in the World Championships as far as intervarsity debating goes. So they're no slouches when it comes to debate. We have enormously high expectations of the delivery this afternoon. And I think we're very fortunate, as I said earlier, to have them come along and be part of our conference and getting into the spirit of our industry. All right, we ready, Anne-Marie? Okay, so you guys okay? And look, I'm just going to quickly introduce the teams. From the affirmative, we've got Joshua Cahill, Kathryn Morrison and Theodore Stapleton. They're the affirmative, which are pushing the argument Australia would be better off without mining. And on the negative, we've got Edmond Stewart, Chelsea Moran and Daniel Kirkby. So without any further ado, the first speaker for the affirmatives is Joshua Cahill. So Joshua.
Ladies and gentlemen, if one thing is truly important that we can all agree on today, it is that we are creating a better world for not only ourselves, but for future generations. Mining in Australia has been a large part of creating a prosperous country for all. However, mining has also now left us with an inflexible economic system and delivered us a world which is set on the path to becoming legitimately uninhabitable within the century. I today will be providing you with two main issues in this speech. Firstly, on the irrevocable and immense contribution mining has made to the imminent threat of climate change. And secondly, how mining has perversely created a stagnant and one-track economy which will struggle to take full advantage of the Asian century. So to this first idea of the environmental impacts. The United Nations say that the single biggest threat to human well-being is climate change. By 2050, there will be 50 million climate change refugees around the world. It is easy to forget that people's homes are literally being engulfed in water right now. Extreme weather events are becoming commonplace, and temperature increases are turning our rainforests into deserts. Mining has had a large part to play in the environmental instability within our world. Coal mining particularly has perverse harms to society through its pollution in the air, through the discharges of emissions. Australia itself has had the largest carbon footprint per capita for the last 2 years, and as such has an immense impact on the climate change epidemic. Not only does coal mining have an immense issue, we find that most mining practices within Australia have some harm to them, whether they be uranium and the radiation waste, or the use of nickel and gold and the harmful techniques there. To put things into perspectives, 2 newly opened and built Queensland mines contribute to 6 times the carbon footprint of the United Kingdom this year alone. The fact of the matter is that we are literally killing our planet because we have preferenced the short-term decisions of providing ourselves with mining benefits over the long-term benefits of renewable energy and long-term outcomes that can be brought about by this. The fact is that when you make these preferences in our society, it is really harmful because you're contributing not to the renewable R&D, like research and development that we could be providing in our country with the boundless opportunities with solar and wave power, but you can create a sustainable country through those means. The fact is that you are preferencing those short-term decisions which are creating such high environmental impacts, which is why we should not preference them. Secondly, onto these economic impacts. Right now, because of this preference of mining in our country, what we've had occur is a dependence on the resource industry in these economies. This creates one major outcome. This is a 2-speed economy, whereby you either have high booms, as we've experienced for the last 2 decades, or very low lows. The fact is that currently we are seeing a large decrease and a large decline in the power of our importers of particular resources. Particularly China has now experienced an inevitable downturn whereby we are seeing a 24-year low in the GDP of that country. This prevents fundamentally Australia from reaping the rewards that it has for so long. We regret the decision for Australia to implement mining as such a large and preferential system because this dependence on resources has stopped us from entering a very lucrative market in the service industry. Because what we tell you is that this lucrative market has so much more endless possibilities and creates a more sustainable economy for countries overall, rather than a resource system and a dependence on this resource, which has a finite time attached to it because we only can create so much iron ore in our country, we can only create so much uranium. The fact is that when we invest in our opportunities in other forms, it creates more outcomes for all, and as a result, we were always happy to propose.
Do you want me to introduce you? So for our second speaker, we've got, who's the first speaker for the negative, Edmond Stewart. Welcome him.
Ladies and gentlemen, Australia was not born a lucky country. We made Australia lucky through hard work, innovation, and good governance. Mining gives us an opportunity to create sustainable and meaningful growth in our country. When it employs over 200,000 people, represents almost a third of all companies listed on the ASX. We think that shows Australia that mining has a big role to play in our nation. I've got 2 points that I want to talk about that explain the huge advantages of mining. Firstly, the economic benefits that come across, and secondly, the way this improves the lives of people in regional and Indigenous communities across Australia. And I'll address briefly the issue of environmental harms. So, to talk about economics. Growth as a fundamental concept is good. We all understand that, and we know that growth brings about a lot of benefits. Mining is our single largest driver for our growth right now. Mining represents almost 8.4% of Australia's GDP. That's almost double what it costs to fund our education system, ladies and gentlemen. Let that sink in for a moment and let that huge impact take effect on you, and you realise how much mining does for us. We know that it provides meaningful employment to almost 200,000 people. And we're not talking about the kind of employment that comes across in America. We're not talking about short-term employment that doesn't allow you to get the amount of work that you want, that doesn't allow you to stay in a stable job for a long time. We are talking about the work that gives you good wages, keeps you in a job for a long time when you know you have that job in the future. It's ensuring that you're working full-time instead of part-time. That is the kind of work that mining provides. It's also very obvious. Mining provides a lot of income to people, those that are being employed, and the people reaping the benefits of it. And the question is, what do they do with that income, ladies and gentlemen? They don't just sit on a pile of money in a corner by themselves. They're spending that money. And the spending of that money itself brings about huge economical benefits to our country and the people who live in it. Why do you think we're seeing such a huge boom in our accounting industries and in all the other areas that support mining? It's because we're spending money that we're generating from mining itself. Now, that's just at an individual level. Let's talk about what this does at a structural level. It generates a lot of capital and structural creations that we can generate and gain advantage from in the long term. We think that infrastructure developments such as highways, the national broadband network, all of those things come about through the demand and money provided by mining. What we're doing with those is, even if we get into a future where mining is no longer as feasible as it currently is, we have a situation where all of that infrastructure provides huge advantages to any other industry that wants to compensate and gain in the future. There are a lot of indirect benefits as well. Quite simply, the government gains a heck of a lot of tax from mining. I'm sure you all know that when you have to file your tax returns at the end of the year. We think tax revenue is very simply extremely beneficial. We know that it provides almost $258 billion worth of export from Australia, and that money goes to the government that generates a huge number of helpful and vital services to our country, whether it be welfare, expenditure on education in the healthcare system. We all benefit from these systems, and everyone in Australia reaps the advantages of mining that no one otherwise would have the opportunity to gain if we did not have mining. I'll talk then quickly about the workforce development and how this advantages so greatly in terms of transferable future skills. We see a huge development in technology, and we think that remote controllable trucks that are operating in mining sites don't just mean we're better at mining. It means that we have technology that we can transfer to other industries and other areas in the future and ensure that we stay on the cutting edge of this global economy. We have developed skills and enhanced knowledge capital. As we know, knowledge and ability to manage a company and ensure that we have a sustainable system is one of the best things that we can develop as a nation in terms of industry skills. Those skills we develop under mining, and we keep them and make sure they are transferable to the future. I'll talk now about my second idea, the benefits to rural and Indigenous people. Indigenous communities are in a unique position where there's very little demand to engage with them, either in the monetary sense or in the sense of altruistic gains. People don't engage enough with these rural communities. We don't think that's good enough. We don't think we engage enough with mining communities. But what Indigenous communities, what mining does is gives us an incentive to go out to those communities where they have resources, to engage with them and improve their quality of life through development of infrastructure, healthcare systems and education that otherwise those communities would never have if we didn't have mining outreach programs in those areas. We think that mining, with the profit incentive that comes with it in those areas, is a huge incentive to improve the quality of lives of those most disadvantaged in our society. It also employs almost double the national average of Indigenous people in mining. We think that's a great benefit. So for all of those reasons, because we think it's great for rural and Indigenous people, because we benefit from economic growth, we are so proud to keep mining in Australia.
Thanks, Edmond. And now our second speaker for the affirmative, Kathryn Morrison.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a responsibility to protect those who are vulnerable. We have a responsibility to acknowledge that there are harms that have been caused as a result of our nation's preoccupation with mining. Namely, the harms to rural communities, which are devastated by the consequences of a fly-in, fly-out culture and en masse, and the dangerous proximity to mining activities, as well as to Indigenous communities who suffer from structural power imbalances in negotiation, which can lead to the loss of valuable land and culture. Before I get to these points, I will deal quickly with some of the material brought to us from the negative team. Now, the negative team wanted to engage with us on this idea of the economy, and what we tell you is that we are so for economic growth, but the kind of growth we see is unsustainable. It's been a tough 12 months for mining. Iron ore prices have fallen, gold prices have fallen, and investment is generally low. There's been disencouragement in exploration. We've seen far less returns, and this is because of the fact that mining in itself is a finite industry. It is built on a bubble, and that bubble will burst. Therefore, all the benefits they wanted to point to were transient. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact is, when we lose the resources that we have covered on for so many years, we are left with nothing, because the fact is we have not developed our economies in a way that is sustainable. We have not developed our economies in a way that are able to productively engage with future challenges and the future obstacles that we are presented with. Now, on to my substantive. So firstly, on this idea of rural communities. Now, what we tell you is that mines in these areas do operate through this employment of fly-in, fly-out workers. However, this influx of workers can devastate local economies and the sustainability of these communities. Firstly, through rent squeezes and housing inaffordability, because we tell you when there is an influx of comparatively wealthy employees into that area, that homeowners and investment owners are able to raise the prices of property. This necessarily forces individuals that have less profit in that community out of those areas, forcing relocation en masse. This has incredibly long-term impacts on community sustainability. Secondly, we would say that oftentimes infrastructure in these communities becomes dependent on these mining projects. And we tell you that local businesses and local communities orientate their interests to align with that of the mine in their area. However, we tell you that these projects are not going to be forever, and when these projects do evacuate these areas, we see the collapse of these small businesses, we see the collapse of these local economies, because the thing they were dependent upon has now left. We see that also there are significant problems with individuals in these areas living close to these kind of mines. Now, it is recognised internationally that living near, say, coal mines causes increases in health problems, increases in respiratory disorders, increases in cancer. Now, while Australia has been unwilling to engage with this research, we think those problems are still there. We think those are incredibly dangerous, and we think it forces people out of these communities when they see they have no other choice. All these factors combine to create a perfect storm, so that when mining projects run their course and the town is largely evacuated, we see the collapse of these individual rural areas due to the collapse of population either being driven out or through the lack of demand as the mining projects go back and invest in other areas. Now onto this idea of Indigenous Australians. Now we would tell you, and I think it's pretty acknowledged, that Indigenous Australians see land as more than just a physical space in which they occupy. Land is an intrinsic part of their identity. It links them with their histories, it links them with their traditions, it links them with their practices. We tell you that this group has been significantly disadvantaged in the past, and one of the primary reasons for that, and one of the insurmountable reasons for that, is there does exist an incredible power and information asymmetry when it comes to negotiation. We also tell you that when agreements are entered into, it is often very hard to retract agreements without being able to undo the damage that has been done. And even when there is incredible benevolent spirit on the part of mining corporations, we tell you that that information asymmetry can never lead to the best outcomes for those individuals, especially given the flawed native title policy we have in Australia, which primarily favours the interests of seemingly everyone else above those traditional owners of the land. Ladies and gentlemen, I come here today with a tough challenge to convince a group of miners that perhaps it's not the best thing for Australia. However, I think we have to acknowledge there are significant harms that have occurred under our status quo. Our economy is not as sustainable as it could have been. Our rural communities suffer from the burdens of mining and fly-in, fly-out culture, and our Indigenous populations often have to see their cultural and historical lands destroyed. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Kathryn. Just a reminder too that Anne-Marie's ringing the bell when there's 1 minute left, so just so you're aware of that. All right, our next speaker for the negative is Chelsea Moran.
Ladies and gentlemen, Josh wanted to tell you a lot at first speaker about how mining was so bad for global warming and for climate change. What the affirmative team have never been willing to engage with in today's debate is that the demand for iron ore, the demand for gold, the demand for diamonds is going to exist regardless of whether Australia engages in providing and servicing that demand or not. What we would say on our side of the house is that when Australia actually participates in the mining industry, they do so in a fairly responsible way and in a comparably responsible way, in contrast to other countries, to developing nations who pollute to a lot greater extent when they engage in mining practices. And for this reason, that Australia engaging in mining actually does more to protect the environment than it otherwise would if they didn't. So moving on to two main issues in today's debate, that being the environment and international relations. But firstly, to quickly address what Katie told us so far. Katie wanted to talk a lot about communities, specifically regional communities and Indigenous communities, suffering at the cost of like housing affordability, small business crashes, and like being removed from their land due to the mining industry. What we would tell you on our side of the house is that before the mining industry actually comes into these communities, often these people don't have access to basic like running water, to electricity, to roads, to healthcare. We would say that even if after the mining industry leaves that region and some small business is affected by this, the fact that they do have a functioning hospital in that town now means that they've gained some net benefit from the mining industry moving into that area. And furthermore, we would recognise that in regards to Indigenous people, that at times there can be like imbalanced negotiation skills between Indigenous people and mining industry. But what we would say is this is not a reason to like completely eradicate like mining within these regions, but more so a reason to advocate for Indigenous people having more say in these processes and being able to put more value of mining back into their community. So moving on to my two main issues. Firstly, the environment. So we think Australia contributes like a large percentage of the production of the world's resources, in particular in regards to iron ore, in regards to gold, and regards to lead. This mining is done, as I said, in sustainable ways. And we see this through the fact that mines have to be approved by like the Department of Environment, by the fact that there's fairly a general awareness within the Australian community that you can't just like rip up the land for no particular reason. What we think we do is two major good things within the Australian mining community. Firstly, we mean that this mining is not occurring in the third world, where not only is pollution occurring, but very often exploitation of workers and of particular groups within that community occurs. We have labour laws to protect this, and we have environmental laws to protect this, prohibit against this kind of level of pollution. And secondly, we think that Australia holding 1/3 of the world's uranium means that we do have the potential to mine in a way that produces sustainable and clean energy that can be sold to places like India and China that have large populations and are subject to like a large degree of emission production. Why should we care about this as Australia, and why is this good for the Australian mining community? We think that at the end of the day, that it's in Australia's best interest to promote mining in a way that is going to negate the harms of climate change and global warming, and that is what we do by keeping mining in Australia. So secondly, moving on to these ideas of international relations, we think that through our use of mining, we've been able to develop good trade relations with particular countries, specifically within Asia. This because it gives us the political capital to do things such as the free trade agreement that's been discussed with China over the past few weeks. We think that what things like a free trade agreement with China actually provides us with, if it means our imports are going to cost less, so we can have cars and manufactured goods available to the Australian public at a reduced rate. We also think it gives us a better capacity to export other goods aside from mining to the community. Secondly, in terms of foreign direct investment, we think that mining and having a good mining community within Australia means that Australia is a good, safe investment for foreign investors. They have the incentive to invest because they know it's a safe choice. This investment comes along with engagement with other nations. It comes with an injection of capital, but which is often transferable, not only to the mining industry, but with other industries overall. So we completely refute the idea that we're promoting like a one-sector economy, when a fact of the matter is the things that we're able to do within the mining community transfer over to other sectors of the economy and support those areas that are struggling. What we would say is that even if the mining economy was to slow down, we think that the boom that has been created has supported the development of other sectors and other industries within Australia, which overall means those industries are stronger than they would have been without mining. And it's for those reasons that I'm proud to oppose.
Thanks, Chelsea. And our final speaker for the affirmative, Theodore Stapleton.
Before I start, I'd just like to thank AMEC for having us, and while it's not an envious task to have drawn the short straw this afternoon, we have enjoyed ourselves, and we'd like to thank all of you for listening. I'm going to do two things in this speech. I'm going to firstly discuss the economic, both macro and micro issues that have been debated this afternoon, and secondly discuss the environmental harms that mining has and how those can be mitigated. So firstly, on the economy. We told you a couple of things right from the start of this debate. We told you that the Australian economy has been dominated in the last few decades by mining, and it has become a single-track economy and a two-speed economy. But also, significantly, we have to recognise that the Asian region is increasingly going to become the economic superpower of the world. We know that China is slowing. It can't continue to build a skyscraper every single day. It has to transition into a knowledge-based economy and away from the manufacturing and infrastructure that has been driving the growth in Australia for the last few decades. Because of that, mining has left us unprepared. We have piggybacked on China's incredible growth rates, and we're unprepared for providing the sorts of services that really will be needed and will be beneficial for Australians to cash in. We told you that there's an opportunity cost to having all of our talented people and graduates go into this industry and to have other industries suffer at the expense of mining. What did they tell us? They told us that mining has been an incredible source of employment and growth in the Australian economy. Those facts are indisputable. But the problem with that is that it wasn't an argument for mining itself, it was an argument for growth and employment. And that was premised on the notion that we would have no growth and employment without mining. We thought that was pretty fallacious, because when you have a hole in an economy with lots of talented people and lots of demand in the region for services, professional services, for renewables, for services that we currently provide and export in incredible ways, like education happens to be one of our biggest exports. When you have incredibly talented people in an economy and a knowledge-rich economy, we can capitalize on those services, and we can't do that when we are preoccupied with mining, which is increasingly becoming less profitable, but also isn't good for our long-term stability in the region. We also think that the particular dominance of mining in the economy hasn't been good. It has seen decreased levels of productivity in the mining industry itself. We thought that was well documented through the boom times. We think it's unhelpful for an economy to have monopolies, but it's also similarly unhelpful for economies to be dominated by particular industries. We also told you some significant material about harms to local towns. We told you that housing prices shoot up and rent becomes unsustainable for people who've lived in those towns for generations. We also told you that local companies are often ignored at the expense of, or rather, mining companies tend to opt for big service providers from the cities who can service the kind of FIFO turnover that they need. But also we told you that when those mines leave those towns, industries which have been turned towards those mines and have been sustaining those mines and the demand that those mines have created in those communities are left high and dry. We don't think that you have a hospital left behind. We think that often those sorts of services are provided internal, but within the FIFO community. We don't think that miners are, I'd like to hear if you would, but I don't think there's going to be much of a reason to keep paying for a hospital post the mine's existence itself. We thought that was pretty fallacious from their team. But also they wanted to tell us about technology. They said, oh, we'll get better technology. We think that technology in the mining industry isn't necessarily transferable, but also there was an opportunity cost when you're investing in mining technology where you don't get that renewable investment that we so dearly needed and so dearly wanted. Then they wanted to tell us about investment and credit ratings. We'd point to the recent fall in the credit rating of WA and say that was incredibly linked to the sorts of investments that have been going on in the mining community. Secondly, how does this affect the environment? We told you that there was a huge imperative in today's debate, and if there was one thing that we should care about, it's the future of the world itself, because we all want a better life for our children, and we all want a better life for those who are coming after us. We think that responsibility is ours in Australia, given we are, on per capita, one of the highest emitters of CO2. It is an imperative that we halt the deforestation and the pollution that is being caused. We also told you that the kind of investment that we've got in Australia has crowded out renewable investment and research and development. They wanted to tell us that it would go to worse places. There are a couple of problems with that. There are many barriers to entry that don't exist in Australia that do exist in developing countries. Infrastructure problems. You have to build roads to get to the resources. Secondly, there are regulation and governance problems where you can't get the stability that you need to carry out big operations. But also there's the stability in the financial sector that you desperately need to try and draw the amount of money out of that economy to invest in the withdrawal and the exploration of those lands. Now, we admit that this wouldn't be good if mining went to third world countries. But we think that if we were 10 years or 15 years further down the track on renewable investment, sustainable development could involve renewable energy. Ladies and gentlemen, because we have created a stagnant economy, but also because we are harming the one thing we need to survive, which is our environment, I am very proud to propose.
Thanks, Theo. And now, wrapping up, final speaker for the negative, Daniel Kirkby.
Ladies and gentlemen, Theo's probably right. We probably still would have growth in Australia without mining, but the question is the amount of growth we have, the amount of investment we could attract, what our credit rating would look like, and how quickly our economy would be growing. Because the biggest fallacy they've made across their debate is to assume that economics is a zero-sum game, that if the mining sector is growing great guns, that means that our professional services or education industry can't grow alongside it. When in fact the actual opposite is true. The faster mining grows, the more incentive there is for miners to employ better accountants, which in turn put pressure on the government to increase training standards inside universities. The faster mining grows, the more demand and higher pay rates there are for teachers, as it becomes harder and harder for the state to attract people for teachers, which is why the state governments have increased rates of teaching in recent years and paid more to teachers. Economic growth doesn't exist in a vacuum. When you grow one sector of the economy, it inevitably drives other sectors of the economy. And that is why the mining sector traditionally has been a large investor in things like renewable energy and things like that. Countries should specialise in the area that they have a comparative advantage in, which in Australia we were blessed with a lot of resources, and so we chose to specialise that. And the trick is to use the growth and the money and the economic activity you get from that to benefit all aspects of life. And that is how the Australian economy has and should continue to operate in the past. So 2 questions to ask in this debate: economics and environment. And I'll start with the environment. So they told us that there was a big imperative in this debate, that we had to stop global warming, and we obviously agreed, and we think probably everyone roughly agrees. But the question we asked is, what would global warming look like without mining in Australia? They tried to tell us just then at Theo that without mining in Australia, renewable energy investment would be further down the track. I have a few responses to that. The first thing is important to know that the mining sector has been a large contributor to renewable energy investment. Solar panels have been a big part of the mining sector in Australia as off-the-grid mining and things like that become really important from the mining sector. That's why many innovations in the field of renewable energy have been paid for out of the pocket of mining. When you have industries like mining that can pay the government a lot of money in taxation revenue and have the money themselves to do a lot of investment, things like investing in renewable energy become more viable as activities. So the problem when you cut down big growth industries like mining is you actually reduce the amount of capital and free-flowing money we have to invest in stopping global warming. But secondly, we told you that we thought Australian mining actually decreased demand from mines around the world that were worse than polluters. But third, a really obvious answer to global warming here: Australia controls 1/3 of the world's uranium, and nuclear energy is undeniably one of the most effective stopgap measures at dealing with the interim gap between having sustainable renewable energy that can provide baseload power and using fossil fuels. Without mining uranium, the world's going to really struggle to use nuclear power as that stopgap. One of the main things Australia can do as an international actor to help fight global warming is to mine its uranium and to, as we are doing right now, give it to countries like India so they can start shutting down their very dirty coal plants and transition towards systems that are less environmentally polluting. Australia's mining industry has been one of the forefighters in the world at fighting global warming, and we think that's why Australia is better off for having mining. So given that, economics. They tried to tell us 2 things in the economics argument here. The first, that was mining was unsustainable in the long run, and the second was that we were existing in a 2-tier economy. Again, I come back to this. Even if mining is unsustainable in the long run, that's fine. Plenty of industries throughout history have been unsustainable in the long run. That is not to say they haven't done good and done great things while they've existed. The trick is about how you spend the money and what you do with the profits you make while you're engaging in mining. We think in Australia's case, mining has been really good in that variety. But let's specifically talk about what I mean like that. What did they want under their side of the house? Theo said they wanted things like investment in professional services, investment in education, investments in moving towards a service-based economy, and that sort of thing. We think mining and the growth in mining has a huge part to play in that. Note that for governments to transition people into new skills, they have to have certain amounts of money and financial backing to provide effective and functional education systems. You will note that the mining sector has been a large contributor to university funding throughout its entire existence because they want successful, intelligent graduates to work in their program. But again, we tell you that doesn't exist in a vacuum. Economics isn't a zero-sum game in this regard, and the more you can have free-flowing investment, the better. And we told you this, and we explained that we thought to a huge extent mining inside Australia boosted our credit rating as it provided a safe, undertone or base note behind the economy. And yeah, Theo's right. We dropped from a AAA credit rating in WA to a AA credit rating recently. Oh no, we're only WA, a AA. That doesn't matter, right? The point is we still have a really good credit rating, which means we can borrow money at a cheaper rate and governments can borrow money at a cheaper rate to do things like engage with the very investment in skills and training education they want to talk about. Economics doesn't exist in the vacuum they want to do it. Growth in one area doesn't not spill into other areas of our economy. Our economy is too intertwined. Professional services do a lot of work for mining industries and vice versa. That means that means when the mining sector grows great guns, you benefit education and you benefit things around it. Finally, rural communities. They said the problem in this debate was that eventually mining sectors pull out of these rural communities, and that means the rural communities collapse. Well, think about the alternative there. The alternative there is they were never in the first place, so often these rural sectors were collapsing before mining was there in the first place. That's not a very strong point for them in this debate. We're proud to stand behind an economy that has been pushed by mining, but has not been solely dominated by mining, and we think that is the trick in Australia's economy in the future. Thank you very much, AMEC.
Well, that was fantastic. And I congratulate you all. I don't think I've heard so many words crammed into 30 minutes in my life. And it was going through my mind as I was listening, I'm thinking, you know, if these guys are going to line up in advocacy groups in the future, it'll be terrific to see you if you're adversarial in your interests in the long term, to see you debate each other in a real public forum in the context of representing those advocacy organisations. And I'm sure for any of you there's a strong future there if you want to take it. Look, I think we've been very fortunate to see some people who not only added to our program, but I think have certainly done the university proud, done yourselves proud, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to see you in action. I can understand, you know, why you get so engrossed in the world of debating, and particularly take it to the world stage, and that you've achieved what you have. So I congratulate you on behalf of us all for that. And would you join me in just giving him one last round of applause? They are going to join us for a quick drink, I hope, afterwards, in a little cocktail session. And AMEC believes in responsible drinking, so we won't have any issues there. So we look forward to catching up with you all in a few minutes and enjoy a drink. Well, I guess it's really, I want to turn it over to you. We've heard the affirmative, and I'm going to ask you, in the context of being the adjudicators on Australia would be better off without mining, in a very friendly way, to give me through a show of hands those who support that the affirmative have won this debate. Okay. I think you two can relax. Now, I'd like to ask those to show their hands for the negative. Okay. Well done, guys. And without any bias or prejudice from myself, I actually called it a draw. So we do thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for being here this afternoon to enjoy not only this session, but obviously the proceedings. We look forward to catching up with you over a cocktail right now, and 8:30 in the morning we're going to be blessed with David Flanagan's presence in giving us the Atlas and iron ore story. So once again, just show your appreciation to the University Debating Club.